into Ligony and Ravina and that area, and then a part of Mona Heights, Blue Castle. That was the first housing scheme, and it was built on hope. But then you have pockets of lower class settlements, Standpipe. You have Kintyre. Well, Ellison Flats is supposed to be a lower class housing scheme, but it's no longer that today. It has graduated to lower middle class. And you also have Tavern. So then, in terms of black history, I think hope fits beautifully into our understanding and our celebrating the work of black people in Jamaica in terms of development. And I'm happy now that much of hope is in the hands of blacks in Jamaica today, out of the hands of the elites of England, to be in the hands of the democratized, in the hands of hundreds and thousands of black people.
Well, one of the consequences of that transfer is that the Hope Estate has been from a slice of territory up in the corner of the Ligony Plain to being integrated more into Kingston. I wonder, but the earlier stages of your book give us an estate with a gate with gates and closing off. What do you think of Hope's relations with its neighbour downhill 5 miles away at Kingston over the earlier period before emancipation, before the land breakup of the 1840s?
Mm-hmm. Well, you must have heard of, or you must, think you might know, many Jamaicans will know Elixon Road, right? And we all know Hope Road, right? Old Hope Road, Elixon Road. What do they have in common? They are the names of the owners of Hope at one time or another. In fact, the first Hope, Major Richard Hope, who got that estate who got that piece of land in 1656. His daughter got married to a young lawyer by the name of Elixon, and so the name became Hope Elixon. And he was the one, not him, but his children after that who had succeeded in getting that estate, who had inherited the estate. They built that road, Elixon Road, leading where? Where did Elixon Road lead us to? Into Raytown. Now, Raytown, as we know it today, was there's where, and that, right at that seafront, was the Hope Port. So you had piers, wharfages, warehouses, and all that belonged to the owners of Hope. So that was an important relationship at that time, because they were shipping their sugar off to England from their own port, and they had their own warehouses, which others would share, which other estates would share with them. Also, just to point out that Tower Street General Penitentiary downtown, the prison, right? We all know where that is. Ellison Roads run right into the prison. Now, that piece of land was granted to the government of Jamaica by the owners of Hope. So there was this relationship. In terms of merchants, I'm not quite certain if they had any merchant houses. But what I do know is that that was their major relationship. And as I stated before, after that era, government, the water that powered the mill on the Hope Estate served the people in Kingston. Yes.
Professor Satchell, Hope is a very interesting name for an estate. We see that it's eponymous, that's to say it comes from an individual.
Mm-hmm.
But Jamaica has lots of place names which are sentiments, and the most common of all is content. Content is quite a different sentiment to hope, and you're able to make quite a lot of play with the idea of hope. Hope transformed in the title, Hope rekindled, but the one I really like is when the position of the Hope Estate becomes hopeless, and you repeat this various times, so it's good that you can do that. That's not really a question. I'd like to ask you about role of religion and the particularly black churches on the Hope Lands, which border on Augustown, of course.
Yes, indeed.
And another of your favourite topics, the story of Deadwood.
Yes. Well, as we know, during the 1880s, 1890s to about 1920, the Lord and Master of Augustown, Alexander Deadwood, reigned supreme in this area with his Jamaica Native Baptist Free Church. And that would have, his church, which was in Augustown, would have been one of the first churches, a black Native Baptist church in this area. But that church had branches right through Jamaica. And indeed, abroad, persons from all over would flock to Augustown in their thousands to be baptized in the Hope River, because that was a healing stream of Jamaica. Now, there was another Native Baptist church that came on board in the 1930s, 1940s, over by Kinter, or by Kinter there was this Native Baptist church. By that time, Deadwood, by 1840s, Deadwood have died because he was in prison in 1920. But he, I think, was able to have a strong presence in this area, in his community in Augustown. And as such, many persons, many of the blacks in Kintyre, in Sandy Park, in Sandy Standpipe, and all of Jamaica were affiliated in some way or other to Deadwood. So then, I would say that Deadwood played an important role as a black man and as a black Native Baptist in bringing religion from the white aristocracy to the level of the poor, lower class black, something that they could understand because it was preaching in their own language. But of course, other churches came on stream on the Hope Land. We have St. Margaret's in the 1930s. That would have been one of the first. And many of the persons, interestingly, I would just want to touch on this, that persons who live down in the Standpipe, Confidence Pen, Ligony area, they're black people. Many of them were small black artisans and shopkeepers and so on, who didn't want to associate themselves with the tenants and the wage laborers and peasants in the Papine, Tavern, Kintyre area. They snubbed them. And so they didn't come to, in the 1940s, they had their own church, the St. Margaret's Anglican Church. And you had whites in there as middle class, brown people, we call them coloreds, and you also had blacks. Up in going up to rural, because that was becoming more and more urbanized, whereas Kintyre, Papine, Tavern was more rural, and they were more or less lower class, and they went to the Native Baptist Church. After that, other churches came on stream, the Hope United Church, and now we have a plethora of churches on the Hope Lands.
I think our time is running out. Dr. Robertson, do you have a quick question?
I was going to actually spread in the other side, because your book also talks about further new groups that come in as the Hope Lands become Outer Kingston and become Kingston. And you talked about the civil service attempts to build new properties and to set up middle-class houses up here. How do you feel these groups fitted with the pre-existing groups that were already there?
Well, as I said before, those individuals who lived in the Ligony area tend to be more middle class, upper middle class, because many of them are leaving downtown to live in this area. So many of the upper middle class moved up, and you had lower middle class, and you had aspiring persons to the middle class. Whereas on the other side, up the top, up in Kentire, you had the lower classes. Now, the government, you're talking about 1950s now, when they had the housing laws. The government had, the government is one of the largest employers of labor. And many of the lower income workers didn't have housing. And to ease that problem, the Jamaica Civil Service Association teamed up with the government to build the first government housing scheme, the first and only government housing scheme in Jamaica, on Blue Castle, which is part of it. Blue Castle was once a cane piece on the Hope Estate, and that's where they had the first set of housing for middle-class workers. After that, you had other middle-class housing coming up. The second one would have been Hope Pastures. Then you have Ravina. On the Hope lands, the government had a plan in the 1950s, late 50s, to rehouse downtown slum dwellers. So they got a grant from Canada to build small, low-income houses and to move to reform and to rehouse many of the slum dwellers in town. And one of the first projects was on Hope Lands by Ellis Flats. So those small houses were built, whereas they had Mona Heights coming on at the same time, and that was more for middle class. So but Mona Heights would not have been on Hope Estate per se. Blue Castle was. Mona Heights was on Mona Estate. Ellis Flats, lower class income or low income housing. So there you have the government with a new housing bill or act or law went all out as best as they could to house people from downtown in more or less affordable middle class surroundings on the lower section of Hope, and those of lower income, the upper section of Hope.
Well, I think we probably have to wrap up soon. Before we finish, I'd like to say thanks to all of those people who've been watching by whatever medium, particularly on Facebook and online and so on. We've been discussing this fine book by Professor Veront Satchell. The book is called Hope Transformed, a historical sketch of the Hope landscape, St Andrew, Jamaica, 1660 to 1960. It's published by the University of the West Indies Press, and for anybody with an interest in the area up this way towards the University of the West Indies where we're talking from, it's a fine introduction to what's on the landscape and how that landscape has been transformed over the last approximately 300 years. And we can definitely recommend it as a very good read. And I'd like to thank Dr. Robertson from the Department of History and Archaeology for his contributions, and to thank Professor Satchell for his contributions this afternoon, and more importantly for writing the book. And we thank the University of the West Indies Press for publishing the book. And thank you all for watching.